I want you to open up in your Bibles to Exodus chapter 9 as we get started this morning. Exodus chapter 9. I want to say that one of the things that we are obviously doing that should be clear to all of us is that we are tracing God's steps. We are watching God work. One of the principles that we have concluded, one that is right and correct, is that for the most part, God always shows us what He's going to do before He actually does it. This series is based on two concepts. It's based on what God says and what God does. And we are sort of going through what God does before we go through what He says. But we know that that whenever He is going to do something, certainly something major, that He always tells us what it is that He is actually going to do. And so that's pretty informative for us, because if He tells us He's going to do something, then we can look at the historical narrative of the Scriptures and we can find in them, we can watch Him fulfill and develop and bring to pass the very thing that He said that He was going to do. And so up to this point, we have determined that I'll erase this here in just a minute, but there were three things that God said to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, that He was going to make out of Abraham a great and mighty nation. You don't just make a nation out of somebody. That doesn't just happen. If you saw somebody walking down the street, I've used the illustration several times, you wouldn't say, well, there goes a nation. It takes years, it takes hundreds of years maybe to make a nation. But God says, I'm going to make a nation out of you. So we saw that the first thing that you have to have if you're going to have a nation is that you have to first have people. Then the second thing is that you have to have a place for those people to go. You have to have some land. They can't just, we see here in the book of Exodus that the people of God, the Israelites, they're just a bunch of people. They're milling around out in the desert. They don't have a home. They don't have a homeland, if I can say it that way. And so God has to provide them some land there in Goshen, and He has to get them out of Egypt. He has to take them. He has to move them from one place to another place once He's gotten His people. And then once they are there, they have to have a culture. They have to have a culture. We've called it laws, a way of life. Those three things, any anthropologist would tell you that those three things are absolutely critical for any nation that you're going to have. You've got to have some people, you've got to have a place where they live, and you've got to have some laws that help them to live as a nation. If you don't have the laws, you have nothing but chaos. That ought to be obvious to all of us. And so God's got to get His people to that place. Now, we have, up to this point, we've seen four things. We started out with the founding fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was very slow. We moved just at a snail's pace all the way through that. God gave Abraham a wife. She couldn't have any children. You wouldn't think that that would be the right thing to do, to tell a man that he's going to build a nation out of him and then his wife can't have any children. She finally, at the age of 99, has Isaac. Isaac gets a wife, and she couldn't have any children either. She finally has two. She has Jacob and Esau. God rejects Esau, so we're still back down to one. We were 2 or 3 generations along. And then Jacob has ultimately 12 sons. And those 12 sons became the tribal framework. God wanted to build this nation around tribes. We hear all the way through the scriptures about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. They're mentioned in the Old Testament. They're mentioned in the New Testament. We know about all the 12 tribes and how they were divided up and how they got scattered and all of that. And we'll see some of that as we continue to go through. And then God led them to Egypt. And in Egypt, it was an incubator. It was a place where they were protected. Joseph, we know the story of Joseph. It's my favorite story in all the Word of God. And Joseph became second in command only to Pharaoh. He was sort of lord of he was like the vice president of the world, if I can say it that way at that time. He was in jail. God just supernaturally did what God did. He brought his family. There were about 7 of them, Jacob and his 12 sons and their families. They came up. And for 430 years, they lived in a place right above in Egypt called Goshen. And Goshen was a separated place where they were protected. They didn't have any enemies. And they just began to have babies after babies after babies. And so this lasted a long time. It's about 430 years, and probably at the end of that time, we have gone from 1 man to about 2.5 million people. And so then they needed a leader. And so God gave them a leader, and his name was Moses, and we talked about that last week as to how God actually did that. So now I want us to look at the story. Here they are. They are in Egypt. They have a leader. They are being afflicted. They have become, over that 400 years, they have become slaves. They don't really have anything unless the Egyptians give it to them. They are there sort of at the mercy of the pharaohs. A new king came along, a new pharaoh came along that didn't know Joseph, and they are basically, now they are in bondage. They have taskmasters that are heavy, lay heavy burdens on them. They go around, they put the straw in the mud, they make the bricks, they just trample around, they bring the water in, they do all that kind of stuff, and they wind up building all of these cities for the different pharaohs. And the problem is that they need to come out. They need a way that they are going to be able to come out of Egypt. They need some land. It's not Goshen. It's not going to be Egypt. They need to be able to come out, and that's sort of where we pick up with the story this morning. You have to think about it. They have no weapons. They have no bombs. They have no jets. They have no tanks. They have no missiles. They have no planes. They have nothing. The only thing that they have are straw and bricks. They don't have anything. They are actually slaves. And I actually love this part of the story. It's because, the reason that I love it so much is because what we understand in the story is that unless God actually intervenes on their behalf, they're hopeless. They cannot leave on their own. They would be destroyed if they tried to do that. And God must intervene on their behalf. And so what happens in that part of the story is that the part that I love about it is that because they can't do it, that God is the one that actually gets the glory when they leave. These people are utterly helpless. Now, I want to say to you that God never God never... Honey, can you go in that room and see? It may be on the back. Hang on a minute. It's back here. It's important, I think, in the overall sort of big picture, if I can call it that, to recognize that God never takes any shortcuts. Let me say that in a different way. God always does His work His way. And one of the principles that we've already developed, and I told you that of all the principles that we're going to look at as we go through this series, that the one, if you don't remember anything else that I say to you over these weeks and months or however long it's going to take, that God is never in a hurry. He's not in a hurry in your life. He's not in a hurry in my life. He's not in a hurry in the life of this church. God's ways are different than our ways. He's not going to do things the way that we want to do things. We like the American way. It's easy. It's soft. We don't want there to be any hardship, any problems, any troubles, any bumps in the road. We want everything to be smoothed out. We just don't want life to be hard and to be difficult. And we live for shortcuts all the time. If we have a shortcut, we'll take it. We'll take it every time just to make life a little bit easier. And at times it can be a very hard fact to accept that God doesn't take any shortcuts. We're in a hurry. We're in a hurry. We want to get through. We want this to be done. We want this to be completed. But if we look at this story up to this point, from the time that we started back here, way back there, when we looked at the prologue and how it was 2,000 years, and now we're another 430 years. We go from Abraham and all of the generations and everything, and we're at another 400 or 500 years. God's not in a hurry. He's not in a hurry. If I don't get that, if I don't understand that, if I don't see that, if I spiritually am blinded to that, I will miss God's will for my life. I will miss God's best for my life. The Bible says to wait on the Lord, to be patient with God's timing in our life. In fact, and this is probably the area that frustrates us the most, is that at times God's methodology and the way that God does something at times seems very difficult and seems very hard. If we get sick, we want to get well immediately, right? If we're in debt, we want to get out of debt very quickly. If we are struggling in an area of our life, we want we want all of that to be worked out this week. God just doesn't do that. Sometimes it's hard, it's difficult. And you'll find that to be true in your life or in your ministry. You would have thought, in my mind, you'd have thought that there would have been a lot more palatable, what I would consider to be a much more pleasant, a much more acceptable solution than the cross of Christ, than the death and burial of the Lord Jesus Christ. I would have thought that if God was making a plan, that it would not have included that at all. But it's actually from the time the entire story begins up until the cross. We saw the timeline last week, or we've seen it twice already, that it's about 4,000 years. That's a long time. In the historical narrative, that is a long time, and I just kind of wonder, Lord, well, why? And yet we read in the scriptures that it says that when Christ came, that he came at the exact perfect time. There wasn't a better time in history for that to actually take place. We don't get an explanation. He doesn't tell us why he waited that long. We don't know. I would have thought that when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, that God would have just said, okay, I'm going to send you my son. He's going to make everything right. You're going to have to go through this very long. Okay, you're going to have another son, Eve. It didn't work that way. Here we are 4,000 years down the road, historically. And, I mean, talk about taking your time and not taking any shortcuts and taking the hard and difficult way. The cross of Christ is it. It's it. It was slow. It was something that took a long time. And I think the obvious issue is that if we do God's work, if we do God's work our way, then we get the glory. We get the credit. And if there's one thing that I do not want us to do, it's to mess with God's glory. So if God makes it slow, if God makes it hard, if God makes it difficult, I think in that picture, you can rest that God is doing it in a way where he gets the glory in your life. And so we need to be really careful that we don't do something that causes us to receive the glory that's due to God. I think the glory of God is sacred. I think that's been the case all the way through the study. Now I want you to read with me, beginning in Exodus chapter 9. I want to begin with verse 13 and 14. This whole section of Scripture is about the plagues. The first plague was in chapter 7. We read here about the seventh plague. We're not going to read about it, but this is the beginning of it. And it says here, then the Lord said to Moses, rise early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go. Now here's Moses. He gets up early one morning, he runs over to the Pharaoh's place. You know, he's a Hebrew. He has left the king's court, kind of knocks on the door again, and he says, let my people go, that they may serve me. For at this time I will send all my plagues to your very heart and on your servants and on your people, that you may know that there is none like me in all of the earth. If you haven't got the message yet, if the first 6 plagues weren't enough, I mean, if I went back and read them, the first one was the waters become blood. The second one was all the frogs. The third one was the lice. You like lice? The fourth one were the flies. The fifth one were all the livestock died. The sixth one was that everybody had boils on their body. Have you ever had a boil? Remember Job and how he had boils all over his body, and he would just take a potsherd and scrape his body just for the pain. It would bleed. And then the 7th plague that he is going to send here is going to be the hail. Then he's going to send some locusts. Then he's going to send darkness. It was a darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And then he's going to send the death angel. It's going to go through all of the land of Egypt and kill the firstborn. And that's where the Passover comes from. This has taken a long time. For some reason, I can't tell you why. I guess God raised him up for that purpose. Pharaoh just doesn't seem to have figured out that it's really important. I mean, Moses asked him to begin with in the first one, to let my people go. But here God says, he says, Pharaoh, I want you to know that there's no one like me in all of the earth. You think you're strong, you got your armies, you got all your cities, you built Ramesses, you built this, you've done that, but there's nobody like me in all of the earth, and I am going to show that to you. Obviously, if I can say it this way, obviously, God is going to make a statement to Pharaoh. He's going to make a statement that he cannot deny. Pharaoh's going to lose his firstborn because of his stubbornness. The Bible says in, I think it's 1 Samuel 15 or 2 Samuel 15, that stubbornness is as the sin of witchcraft. To be stubborn, to be unnecessarily stubborn. I mean, I wonder what I would have done. I wonder what you would have done. Maybe one of us would have said, hey, maybe God should just send a bolt of lightning and kill Pharaoh. You know, we'll get this taken care of and everything will be all right. You know, that's just, maybe we'd send in a bunch of rockets and missiles and helicopters or whatever. We'll just go in and we'll just take all of this and something quick and instantaneous. That's probably what we would have done. Not God. Not God. In fact, after the 10th plague had taken place, all of the people, and they had been begging him all along, but it got worse. After the 10th plague, they were begging Pharaoh to let these people go. Now, why did they need to go? Somebody tell me why they need to go. Because they need their own what? Come on. They need their own land. They can't live in Goshen. They'll be slaves for the rest of their life, and they won't really ever be a nation. In fact, if you look at chapter 12 here, if you look at verse 41 through 42, it says, and it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies, that's not talking about an army, it's just talking about this multitude of people, all the armies of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night of solemn observance to the Lord for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. This is that night of the Lord, a solemn observance for all the children of Israel throughout their generations. So what we have is that we have step 5. This was absolutely necessary. Let's see if I can draw this. There had to be, in step 5, a great deliverance. This is not something that these people could do on their own. I'm trying to write big enough so that y'all at the back can see it. There had to be a great deliverance. They had to come out, and it was on this night of the Passover when the death angel went through the land of Egypt that God delivered his people, and he led them to a place, we'll talk about that in just a minute, but it was this deliverance out of Egypt and the subsequent work of God at the Red Sea, where God led them. Pharaoh was sort of chasing them. It was the single greatest concentration and demonstration of the power of God in all of the scriptures for his people. God did the creation. I think the only thing that was greater was the cross of Christ. Nobody was there when God created in the beginning. God created, right? Nobody was there to observe. Nobody was there to see. Nobody was there to look at what God was doing. But this, God didn't have a nation. And now he has the people that are going to be his nation, and he gives this tremendous deliverance, and it's going to get better for them. In fact, from Israel's day of deliverance, she was unable to interpret her life apart from this event. They still, today, you understand what I'm saying? They still celebrate the Passover, right? The unleavened bread and everything, and they still celebrate the Passover, which was that mark, that blood that was placed over the lintel of the doorpost, and the death angel that went throughout all the land of Egypt and Goshen and killed all the firstborn. It killed everything that was a firstborn. But if you had the blood over the doorpost, your firstborn lived. And so they still celebrate that today. But even though they had a leader and there were still a multitude, apart from this, they were still a bunch of slaves. They were a bunch of slaves, and they had to have a way to get out of Goshen. I would say it this way, they were nothing and they had nothing, and they certainly were not seen by anybody as being the people of God. Nobody was afraid of them. Nobody was afraid of them. Pharaoh really wasn't afraid of them. He was just kind of stupid, if I can say it that way. And they were seen as a nuisance and as an irritation and as a pest. And in some ways they were probably seen as kind of a minimal threat out there, just because of the size of who they were. Nobody really liked them. They were just a bunch of slaves. Now you see, and pay very close attention to this point, because of what happened in Egypt and the Red Sea, for the first time, there was a very real and special and unique relationship that was developed between God and these people. If I can say it this way, this is when they actually became the people of God. This was that time. This was that time in history where God delivers them. He leads them out of Egypt. He leads them to the Red Sea. And there Pharaoh and all of his army, they've got the mountains, they got Pharaoh at their back. They've got the mountains up to the left. They've got the Red Sea right in front of them. They are at the doorstep to nowhere. They have nowhere to go. They have no weapons. They have nothing. And there they are at the Red Sea, and God supernaturally opens up the Red Sea, and the Bible says that they walked through as on dry land. And now they were the people of God. Before they had just been slaves, and hopefully you can see, if you're paying attention to the story, you can actually see why God actually led them and brought them to Egypt. You know, the story of Joseph makes all the sense in the world to me now, that he was thrown into the pit. He had the coat of many colors. He had the dream that his brothers were going to bow down to him. All of those kind of things that were a part of the story, and how he was thrown in jail, and Potiphar's wife accused him of something that he didn't do, and he's in jail for 7 years, and all of a sudden somebody has a dream. Joseph interprets the dream. The dream comes true. Pharaoh finally has a dream. It just all makes sense. How God was sovereignly ruling over the affairs of Joseph's life because he had a purpose for him. He had a purpose he needed a place for his people to go. You'd have never thought when Joseph was down in Canaan, Mesopotamia, that he was going to be vice president of the world. But he was. And he was powerful. And he did everything that he needed to do to create the environment for these people to come down. I want to read you a verse out of Romans chapter 11, verse 33. You don't have to turn there. You can stay here in Exodus. Romans 11:33 sort of sums up the sovereign work of God when it says, "Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out." This deliverance out of Egypt is sort of a birth announcement. It's like God has created a nation, and he has brought them out of this place. Look at where God led these people. They've been in bondage, not the whole time, but for a good part. After Joseph died, another Pharaoh came in, didn't know Joseph, and they put the people of Israel in bondage. They were having so many children. They were worried about it. Remember, they told them, say, throw all the babies in the river, all that kind of stuff. The story just keeps unfolding. And there they are. And finally, they are backed up at the Red Sea. And God was the one that led them to that exact spot. They didn't just make a wrong turn somewhere. That's where God led them. Remember, they had the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, and God led them to this place. And there they were. And the armies of Egypt are upon them, and the mountains and the Red Sea, and there's nowhere to go. And then God opened up the Red Sea, and the Bible says that they walked through as on dry land, and when the armies of Pharaoh came through, that it got wet and mushy, and their chariots couldn't go through, and the horses couldn't go through, and they bogged down, and the other soldiers couldn't get out, and all of a sudden the sea converged on them and they died. It says all the bodies just sort of washed up on the seashore. Look at Exodus. This was not a good day to be a soldier in Egypt. Look at Exodus chapter 14, verse 30 through 31. It says, "So the Lord saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Thus Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses." Now, just give me your heart for just a minute, if you will. God provided for these people everything that they needed for their faith. He was going to ask them to do some other things. When they finally got up to the land of Canaan, they decided they weren't going to do it. But at this point in the story, you have to say that God had given them everything that they needed to believe in him and to trust him. They had watched the 10 plagues. They had watched every one of those take place. The water turned into blood, the flies, the lice, the hail, the frogs, whatever it might have been. And then they watched this incredible miracle at the Red Sea. This is God working on behalf of his people. They had just witnessed the greatest display of power for their benefit that they could possibly witness. And God was not looking for what some call blind faith. I just don't like that at all. I don't like that term. If I was ever talking to somebody about coming to Christ, this whole series that I have developed here is a series that is designed to get rid of the idea of blind faith. To convince us that God has told us what he's going to do. He told us that his son was coming, right? There are more prophecies about the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ than any other kind of prophecy in all of the scriptures. He told us how he was going to be killed 700 years before crucifixion was even developed. And he came. He came on that day. There was a reason that the people were singing a particular song as he came through on a donkey. Because God had prophesied that that was going to take place. God has never asked us to just blindly trust him. Scriptural faith is based on historical facts. It's based on real events and an unbelievable demonstration of the power of God that's best seen when Jesus Christ died on the cross and was buried and raised again on the third day. It's not some strange doctrine that has no foundation and no basis for us believing it. It's because we've watched God all along do exactly what he said he was going to do. Time itself is dated to the birth of Christ. He's not some figment of history. He's not some fairy tale that somebody has made up. This is the living God, the creator of eternity, the Alpha and the Omega, who is asserting his deity. And God has provided all the tangible and visible and historical evidence that anyone could possibly ask, and yet people still think that Christianity is a hoax. It's a fairy tale. It's some figment of some ignorant person's imagination. Not at all. For some reason you do not believe in the person and work of Christ, and good luck with your reasons for rejecting him. Exodus 20. Turn to Exodus 20. Everybody knows about Exodus 20. Exodus 20 is what's known as the Ten Commandments. It's the beginning of the commandments that God gives to his people. And if you're a sociologist or if you are an anthropologist, you know that, and you have a multitude of people and they're just sort of milling around out in the desert, and you're getting ready to go from one land into your own land, you know that there's something else that you need. In fact, a nation cannot exist without what God has to give them when he comes to Exodus chapter 20. Here these people are. I cannot get over this. I just want to say at a personal level, just have to forgive my arrogance about this. This is one of those areas that I simply cannot get over mentally and spiritually and intellectually, if I can say it that way. I can't get over the amazing wisdom of God, and sometimes it is strange to me how we have taken this subject and we have chopped it up and we've really made it something that it is not. Here these people are. They have been parked at Mount Sinai for a year. God has taken care of them. You don't just feed 2.5 million people out in the desert. God has taken care of them. He's provided for them. So do you know what Exodus 20 is? Do you know what we call it? Everybody listen. Everybody look up here for just a minute. We call it the shh. We call it the, we don't like to use the word. We just don't like to use it because it carries a negative connotation. I'm no longer under the, don't say it. We call it the law. Well, I'm not under the law anymore. Don't mention that. Don't say it that way. Well, you might think it's legalistic, but the anthropologist, the guy that knows what's going on here, he knows that these people have to have this. They have to have it in order to be the people of God or to be a nation. And without it, all you have is just a big mob. We cannot function as a society. We cannot function as a nation without laws. We can't function without laws that govern our life. Anybody here that doesn't like stop signs? I like stop signs. I actually do. I like red lights. I remember one day I was coming to church. I was coming to church one day, and there was a car on a side road. And he just ran right through the red light. Just comes flying out of the, just literally comes flying out of the road. And I mean, if we had been 5 seconds earlier, he would have T-boned us. Our car would have been destroyed. There's an intersection on the way that they just put up a 4-way stop sign, and they've got blinking lights on all 4 ways that are blinking. They got stop signs on both sides of the road. They got 8 stop signs up at a 4-way stop. Why? Why do they have that? Because of all of the accidents of people just running right through the stop sign. It used to be that we would just go through and we didn't have to stop, and now we have to stop, and I'm glad for that. I would imagine that you don't really imagine the sanitary laws for restaurants, do you? I'm not sure how they, if they enforce them or not, but I think having sanitation laws is pretty good. I don't want to go to a restaurant that's not clean. You don't really mind. We live here. You don't, around nuclear plants, you don't really mind. I've worked in that industry, in the nuclear industry. Andy works in the nuclear industry. You don't really mind there being laws about nuclear plants, do you? I hope not. I hope you don't mind those kind of things. Those are good. Without laws to govern what we do, life would just be utter chaos, and every society on the planet has laws that govern the way that people live. So why should we get uptight when we call what God gave to His people the law? Like there was something that was really bad about it. In fact, He gave them a lot less laws than we have. I'll give you a whole list of the things that we require. This is a lot more than just a law. God is giving His people, everybody listen, God is giving His people a way of life. The New Testament is a way of life. It's a spiritual culture for the believer. In the Old Testament, God was giving His people a way of life, how He wanted them to live, how they could function, how they could honor God. He was giving them that way of life. It's how we live out our Christian life. It has not been given to us as a spiritual suggestion, but as the New Testament has been given to us as a model that we are to follow in our life and to cherish. We live in such a pick and choose spiritual culture that too often we've become very unbiblical in our practice and understanding of the Christian life and what it means to even be a Christian. Let me ask you some very simple questions. As a nation, do we look different than other nationalities? Our friend here today is from China. When you go to China, they look different, right? I've been in a lot of different places in the world, but people look different than we do. That's fine. I look different than they do. Do we dress differently than other nationalities? We do. Do we act differently? We do. Do we talk differently? We do. Every place you go has dialects. I remember when we were in, Eddie and I were in Zimbabwe, they have 4 dialects that they used. The only one I could understand was Afrikaans. And there were different dialects for their languages. You know, we speak differently in the South. Y'all come on down, boys. It's different. Do we think differently? I think we do. See, our way of doing things is different. And here at Mount Sinai, God gives these people, this is the only revealed culture that has ever been given to any people. So we have step 6. I'm just going to draw this the best way that I can. This is step 6. I'm going to call this a revealed culture. And I'm just going to draw it like this for those of you that maybe are taking the notes. I don't know how to draw it. I don't know how. Just don't know how to do it. You just have to let that suffice. God reveals, He gives them a way of life. You can call it the law, but if you really understand what is happening in this grand scheme of things, it's much, much, much more than just a law. I guarantee you that, let's just say, for instance, that you had the responsibility of going into a nation that had been overrun, and you were going to try to help these people get back on their feet. You would establish what? Laws. You'd say, do not steal, do not kill, do not lie, don't run around with another man's wife, don't do this, don't do that. There would be laws. Respect authority. That's exactly what each of us would do. So there were 3 things, you might want to write this down, that the law did for these people. God wanted them to be distinct, and the law made them spiritually distinct. All right? The New Testament makes us, as New Testament believers, spiritually distinct. It makes them morally distinct. And it actually made them physically distinct. They ate differently. They dressed in a certain way that other people didn't. And so God was making them very, very distinct for a lot of different reasons. Now, I want to give you a list. Y'all just listen as I read through this. I'm going to go through I have 2 lists for you. I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. And I want to give you all of the different, not all of them, this is a short list. I want to give you a short list of a lot of the items that God covered that He felt that the people needed in their culture. These are laws, all right? They covered just about everything. This is a short list. Number one, He gave them laws on how to worship Him, how to approach God. We see that in Leviticus when Eddie comes. He's going to speak on the gospel according to Leviticus. You're going to enjoy that. Those times that he gets to speak to us. We call it the ceremonial law in Leviticus. And Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law. He talked to them about how to dress, how to eat properly. Now tell me, just tell me, if somebody were to ask you, what do you hear about as much as anything else today on the news and on all the social media, what is the one thing that you hear about? It's about diet and eating and health and all of that. And God told them how to eat properly. He told them how to sow a field, how to plant a crop, how to farm. He told them how to maintain healthy sanitation. Just think for a minute about what's taking place. You've got 2.5 to 3 million people milling around out in the middle of the desert, and they all have to go to the bathroom every day. How do you handle that? How does all of that work? And so God gave them laws of sanitation. We call it the Department of Health and Environmental Control. There were military procedures, taxation laws, criminal justice laws, marriage laws, parental relationship laws, inheritance laws, widows and orphans laws and procedures, handicap laws. We call it the Uniform Federal Accessibility Standards, UFAS, if you've never seen that. I'm an architect by trade, and for me, UFAS had to be implemented in every building that we did, every restroom that you went into, the size of the doors, how to get people in, how to get them out, exits and all of that kind of stuff. There were debts and loans and interest laws. There were holidays and festivals. We have New Year's, Labor Day, Memorial Day, Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day. We just go on and on and on. We have the same thing. Everything that I'm reading to you that God gave to His people, we have every one of these laws today. There were laws against witchcraft and the occult and sorcery laws. There were tort laws. Anybody know what a tort law is? A tort law is when somebody else does something that damages you or your property. You know, their bull breaks into your cows, and he damages kills one of the cows. What do? I got to tell you this. My wife and I were going up to the seminary for some meetings several years ago. Y'all will remember when this happened, and we're in Gainesville, and some young guy just not paying attention, driving really fast over a hill that comes over, and there's a stoplight. He lived there. He knew it was there. He wasn't paying attention, and he creams into the back of one car and spins around and completely totals my truck. Totals it. He's underinsured. There are a lot of people that have no insurance. So I've got to go out, and my insurance gave me X for my car. For my truck. I had a nice truck. I'd enjoyed it. I'd kept it up. I'd spent a lot of money on it to just maintain it over the years. I do that every 5,000 miles. I get all the things done. I get the bells and whistles for service. I do that on my wife's car. You know, you can spend thousands of dollars just over the life of a car just on tires alone. I bought my wife some 70,000-mile car tires the other day. It's a lot of cash. You know how much it cost me? Once I got a new truck, less what the insurance gave me, that I had to pay for out of my own pocket, $23,000 that I had to come up with to pay to get another truck. Tort laws, damage done by other people, fire, animals, legal procedures, childbirth procedures, burial procedures. It goes on and on. Now just let me read you some of the laws that we have. We have the Department of Energy. Andy, you work for the Department of Energy. I work for the Department of Energy. You work for the Department of Energy, right? DOE. We all know about that. We have the Department of Agriculture. You can believe all the agriculture out where I live. And just the farms and everything. The standard building code. I had to live and die by the standard building code. They tell you the number of nails, size of the nails that have to go into a house if you're building it, and how to do it, and how all of that. There's a Department of Labor, Department of Education. I'm not trying to bore you. There's a Department of Health and Environmental Control, the South Carolina Highway Department, asbestos abatement procedures, the Department of Justice, the Department of Social Services, the State Fire Marshal, the Department of Public Safety, the Coroner's Office, the County Building Inspector, etc., etc., etc. And we complain about God giving His people a law? We're just a bunch of hypocrites. God did what He had to do in order to create a culture for His people. What if there were no laws? What if there were no laws governing food processing? There were no laws governing sanitation issues. You can't live in that environment. Just think of all of the countries that don't have that kind of stuff and that infrastructure in place. You can go to places in India and they're just trash piles, just people, you got babies, you got kids out there, and they're just going through all the bad food, and they're eating it, and they put their waste out in just in a little water thing, goes down by everybody's house. I mean, why do some people think that God was so harsh in giving the law? I want to say this to you. I think this was one of the greatest things that God has ever done. That's my take on the law. God known exactly what His people needed. And this is the only revealed God-given culture that's ever been given. I would include the New Testament as a part of it as well. It would make them distinct from all the other nations, and they would now be known as the people of God. So as we go through this, I don't want you to lose perspective. We have 11 steps to get through this first act, scene 1. I don't want you to lose perspective on the value and the purpose of the law. So now we have the people, and we have the culture, and next we've got to get the land, and that's where we will start next week. Any questions or comments you want to make?